are in the traditional church calendar season of Lent. We started last week. I was at a funeral, but somebody started. Funerals are so funny.
I read your note. Left at the wrong time.
Yes. I was at a funeral last week, but we had an Ash Wednesday service on Sunday because we leased the space. But we are now in Lent. What is Lent? Lent is the traditional time that the church remembers the 40 days in the wilderness Jesus took on before he started his ministry. And so traditionally, for thousands of years, it's not an exaggeration, the church has remembered that time and sought to experience God in a different way during this particular season. We've talked about a lot of different ways that can look over the years. We've talked about fasting, we've talked about not fasting. There's all these angles you can take on Lent. But this is the way that we're taking it on this year. It's called Stories in the Desert. We're going to be talking about different ways that God encounters his people in the desert. What does in the desert mean? What are you even talking about? In different passages in Scripture, there are these different times in which there's lots of flourishing and everything's going well and they're living in the land that God gave them. And there's other times in which they're wandering and they feel lost and they don't know what's going on and they don't even know where they're going and they're not even totally trusting that God knows what he's doing, and there's lots of questions. For some of us, we feel like we're in the flourishing time. We feel like our life is on track, we're doing the right way, everything's good. For some of us, we feel like we are in the desert, we're in the wilderness. Lent season is one of the times that we make space for that to be part of the Christian experience, part of the spiritual walk. If Christmas is like, hey, time where everybody's supposed to be happy and like cheerful, Lent is the time for people who are like, I'm not okay, and I'm not doing well, and I don't know where I'm going, and I'm not sure what God's doing in my life. That we all come together and we experience that in some way together. So we're going to be looking at times that God was leading his people in the desert. Maybe for us, our desert is totally circumstantial with our life. Maybe it has to do with our deconstruction and reconstruction. We don't know who we are and where we're going anymore. It can look all sorts of ways, but maybe we'll find ourselves in the story. Before we go to the next slide, introduction to a guy named Moses or Moshe or Musa, depending on your tradition. Bring back Musa, I think it's fun. Moshe is this fellow who was born during a time of genocide. And due to the valor of courageous women who went against the violent state, who was aggressive against the marginalized cultural, ethnic exterior, who was committing violence against them, these women said, no, we won't help the state murder and get rid of our immigrant population, and they said we value this life instead. And so Moses was saved, put in a little basket. It's probably the part of the Bible story you're most familiar with, put on the Nile, and he gets miraculously picked up as a baby by Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter then adopts him as her son into her household, into the Pharaoh's household, and she picks his mother, and also miraculously, and through the work of his little sister, to be his wet nurse. So he's raised with a dual identity. Some of us really know about dual identity, feeling like part of two spaces at the same time, two different backgrounds. How do we integrate that? Certainly, it seems like Moshe struggled with that. He presents as Egyptian. We hear that later. A big part of the story. He's raised Egyptian, but he knows he has this other identity because he's still raised by his mother in that context. So zoom forward to 40 years old, probably, unless that's a symbolic number. He murdered somebody. Who among us hasn't been there? He's out there, he's in the desert, he sees oppression happening, he sees an overseer beating a Hebrew man. He says, not on my watch, I don't think so. He beats the overseer isn't dead yet, and he buries him alive in the sand where he dies. Pretty dark. It's there in the original Hebrew if you read it in that language. So he commits this light murder. He comes back to the site next day, and he tries to talk to the Hebrew people who are infighting, right? And he's saying, which happens a lot when you're the oppressed minority, how are we supposed to do this? So he says, stop fighting, don't do that. And they say, what, are you going to murder us too? So now he knows, it is known he's a murderer. He runs away before he gets in trouble with Pharaoh. He ends up in the backside of the wilderness. There's these 7 little girls who are shepherds. That's mostly the population of shepherds, by the way, including in the Christmas story, most likely. So 7 little girls, they're trying to use the well to feed their flock, and there's some older guys there. Moses gets the older guys away, possibly violently, and helps the little girls, and they say, come back and meet our dad. So he meets a priest of Midian, so totally different culture, totally different religion, partially different language, and becomes a part of their family. So now he has 3 cultures, he gets married in that family, and that's where our story picks up in Exodus chapter 3. He feels totally lost, totally alienated, doing a strange job, totally different than what he was raised to be, which was to work in Pharaoh's household, right? So what happens to him next? Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Moshe was a shepherd with the flock of Yitro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, so big guy. He led the flock behind the desert. That's like the wilderness, the outskirts of even the desert, so the outskirts of the outskirts. He came to the mountain of the Elohim, and its name was Horev, which means sword. He goes to Sword Mountain. Very cool, we can talk about that later. An angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. So what's remarkable about this, we might have the lullaby effect. If we grew up with this story, this feels normal to us. Yeah, pretty much, no problem. This is strange because we think of, and the people at that time would have thought of God as being very location specific, as the gods were. Ashur is the god of Assyria. And so it goes. So Yahweh should be the God of Israel. But he's out where they filmed Dune. He's not there. He's hanging out with Timmy Chalamet. And God shows up, right? He is in the middle of nowhere, doesn't know what his calling is, what his purpose is in life. He's doing the job of like 8-year-old girls. Unless he's gone out to like shear the sheep or something, they gave him a side job that they normally give to little girls. They're like, here, you have a job. Probably doesn't feel great for Moshe. And there, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, the angel of God appears to him in a bush that's on fire. What can we learn from this? We can learn from this even when we feel lost, even when we feel moreless, even when we don't know who we are, where our home is, what our real identity is. It is there that we can still encounter God. God can still show up even in those circumstances. It's not that God was waiting back in the land, back in Israel, for Moshe to come back and then he could speak to him. God appears in this bizarre little spot in the middle of the desert and encounters him there. So can we see glimpses of where God might be right where we are in our lives, in our spiritual walk? So what happens next? Moshe looked. Look here. The bush was consumed in fire, but not eaten. Moshe said, let me turn aside and see this great sight. Why does the bush not burn up? Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, and Elohim called to him from the midst of the bush. He said, Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe said, look, here I am. He said, do not come near to here. Take off your sandals from upon your feet, because the place where you stand is holy dirt. We can see here that even though some of us have been enculturated out of bringing our curiosity to our faith, out of bringing our curiosity to church, out of asking questions, curiosity here is holy. There is a version of the story in which he sees a bush that's on fire and is like, well, that happens sometimes, I guess, and keeps walking. He says, that's weird. That makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm not so sure. I'm going to worry about my sheep. Or, for some of us, that's how it looks. I have something to do. I have a job that's been given. I don't want the high priest, my father-in-law, to be upset with me. I'm going to make sure I stay on track. I'll keep keep that in mind, that there's a weird, and sometimes the culture, the church, whatever, our parenting has made us feel like it's wrong to stop and ask questions about the things that are mysterious, the things that catch our attention, the things that spark our curiosity, and we ignore it. Curiosity is sacred, and it doesn't always happen. Sometimes he could have been so head down looking at his feet that he didn't even notice. There's a Jewish tradition that the bush was always on fire, that every single day he was in that area, it was always full of the Spirit of God, and he just never noticed until this day. So when we feel that curiosity, it's our joy, our responsibility, our opportunity to turn toward that curiosity, to say, there's something in me that resonates with what's happening over there. There's something within me that's sparking that says, oh, I'm going to go check that out. And so he turns toward it. And that is our opportunity to do so as well. There's also a barrier here. He says, take off your shoes. Unless it's like midnight, that sand is hot. Those rocks are hot. This is not a pleasant experience to be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Even up here in the inland northwest, sometimes in the summer, walking on sand, getting down to the river, wherever you're going, it's like, Moshe's probably doing that. He had to pass this barrier of discomfort in order to pursue something that felt like it might be God. And for some of us, that is also the case. Maybe we have a 9 to 5, but we've been working through our deconstruction, we want to do our reconstruction, or maybe we're trying to chase after some spiritual disciplines again, which are a long time off. There can be discomfort in saying, well, the only time I have to do that is during this time that I normally watch YouTube, or the time that I normally am sleeping, or the time that I normally do something else I like. And setting aside that thing for a while and saying, that's good, and there's nothing wrong with that. But also, I have this curiosity. I want to chase it down. I want to read this book. I want to figure out what's going on. I want to pursue these resources. So we see Moshe do that here, including taking off his barrier from the ground, from what's real and sacred and holy. He's able to set aside that barrier. Okay, what happens? God says, so apparently Moshe does it. It doesn't say that he did, but God keeps talking. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Yaakov. God, in meeting him, immediately frames his identity both as God and who Moshe is. He's calling him back to who he is. Moshe is wondering, am I Egyptian? Am I Midian? Am I Hebrew? And God says, the way I address you is by your Hebrew ancestors, and I'm going to name them all. And it's in that you know who I am and you know who you are. And maybe that's why Moshe immediately conceals his face. Maybe it's because in Egyptian priestly tradition, encountering a deity is a very scary thing that you're supposed to undergo all of this training before you do. God's not worried about all that training. We'll see throughout the text, God cares about meeting the people who say yes to meeting him, and that is all of the qualifications that he's worried about. But Moshe conceals his face, for he was afraid to gaze toward the Elohim. Yahweh said, I have seen my people that are in Egypt, driven into the ground with hard labor. I have heeded their shriek from those that are driving them. I know their pains. I have descended to snatch them out from the hand of Egypt and to bring them out from that land to a good land, a wide land flowing with milk and honey. So he goes on. What we can learn about God here is God cares about suffering. Sometimes, especially on a day like today, in a world that we inhabit, we hear from the church, don't worry so much. Jesus is going to come back and it's going to be fine. Maybe we'll get raptured away. Maybe he'll just heal the world slowly. Don't worry. World wars happen, you guys. It's okay. God's worried about what's going on. God's engaged in the world. God sees suffering, and he's troubled by it, and he's looking for partners to engage with in the rescue of his people from oppression, from suffering. It is not a biblical, God-based thing to detach from suffering and problems in the world and float out into outer space and say, well, it's just me and Jesus, and that's all that matters. God became embodied, came to our planet to say, you guys are suffering and I am going to be your rescue. I am here. We see that God does that not just in the person of Jesus, not just at the end of the story, but also at the beginning of the story. He sees our oppression, he sees our pain, he sees our suffering, he is there, and he is troubled by it. and he takes action, right? Because being troubled is one thing, not taking action is another. So God, he goes on, that's what the ellipses denotes there. He goes on to say more things about the situation, and he asks Moshe to engage, to go to the people and to go to Pharaoh and they'll let my people go thing that we know from the songs or whatever. There's so many good songs. But he picks Moshe. What are the things we know about Moshe? He's violent, possibly has anger issues, right? Is that the first person we think of, like, ooh, really hard task? Let's pick an impatient guy who sees that murder as a good option for solving the problem. What he sees in Moshe is someone who cares about justice and is moved by it and is moved to take risks, not committing murder. But God sees in that scene somebody who's willing to step up for 7 young shepherd girls, who's willing to step up for the oppressed worker, and to say no in a very action-oriented way to Egypt. God sees this goodness in Moshe, and he also sees that Moshe's identity is perfectly positioned for this task. If God had just picked an Egyptian could talk to Pharaoh, but he could not talk to God's people very well, right? They'd throw rocks and say, you're not one of us, we're not interested. Moshe already had a hard enough time. If he had just picked someone who was only Hebrew and not Egyptian, the Pharaoh would never have listened to him and just would have thrown him back in the labor camp, right? There is no, he wouldn't have had a platform to communicate. So Moshe, the thing that he finds most painful, the thing that he feels disqualifies him, that removes him from the ability to have community, because he's from both worlds, is the very thing that God picks and says, you are the right person for this mission. And he calls him. He doesn't just call him, by the way, to his own personal joy and healing, which again, sometimes we hear in the church. I absolutely want personal joy and healing for myself and for each of us in this room and outside of this room. Right? Bad, we love that, we seek after it, we pursue it, we pray for it. But that's not the end of the story. He's calling him to more than that, to a specific work that he has to do in the world to put the world back together. And sometimes we hear that and we hear just a really general, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be a good person and do good things. Please do. Please do good things out in our community. We also like that. But God's calling to Moshe is specific. God has specific callings for us that have to do with who he made us to be. What is our actual DNA? What is our spiritual DNA? What are the things that we're passionate about? What are the things that tick us off? All of that God takes into his attention, and he's refining it down and giving us these different experiences that make us more who we are. And he has a specific calling for us. It's not just general, not just be a good person. It's for something, and each of us is different. And that's not necessarily outside of your work, by the way. Sometimes we hear this in church, and it's and that's why on Tuesday we're having an evangelism day. Hooray! We don't have evangelism day. If you want to do that, let's talk. But for many of us, that is our workplace, right? So when we hear call of God, let's also think about what's our occupation, not just what do I do in my spare hours. So next in the story, Moshe has a lot of arguments. If you're reading along in your Bible or your Bible app, this continues into chapter 4. He has all of these things where he says, no, it couldn't be me. You couldn't be picking me. I'm not the right person that you're looking for, God. And he has these 4 arguments about why. One of the things he says is, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Which, with us knowing the story, we're that's a strange thing to say. You literally grew up in his household. He might be your grandpa. He might be your adoptive father. You know this person. Why would you say that? But he doesn't see that. He doesn't have those eyes to be oh, yeah, I do see what God's saying. I am the perfect person. He has a problem of identity. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Some of us also have problems of our identity when we're hearing God call us to do a specific thing. You think, well, who am I to really do that? I'm not really one of the big protagonists on the world stage. I'm just one person living in the inland northwest. What are you even talking about, right? So we can find ourselves with Moshe there, potentially. The next thing he says is, they will ask your name. He's talking about the Hebrew people when he's supposed to go to them. What will I even say to them? So throughout the whole conversation, if you were to read it or to study it, he's saying, I don't even know who you are. Tell me your name. This is where we learn what Yahweh means. But he's saying, I don't even know who you are. I have no relationship with you. And for some of us, we find ourselves in that place of like, that sounds good. I want to do like important good things to help my community. But like my relationship with God has been on the rocks since this happened. Or like I hear other people talk about like, and then I talked to God and he said blah, blah, blah back. And that's never been me. I don't know what they're talking about. Or maybe it's that we've deconstructed and we don't know what we think about God anymore, and we haven't read the books and done the podcasts and all the things to figure out what we believe. How can we possibly start running this race when we don't even know who God is? We might find ourselves with Moshe there. The third thing he says is they are not going to believe me or listen to my voice. This is a question of power, right? So maybe I believe that I can do it that based on who I am. Maybe I can give up the fact that I don't know God very well. But even if those things are true, if I go to try to engage in the social justice work, if I try to be this person in my workplace, if I try to engage with my family about the issues, or help you, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to listen to me. I'm just me. They've never taken me seriously. That's a question of power. Maybe we found ourselves with Moshe there. We don't feel like we're persuasive. We don't feel like the things that we do in our world necessarily have a lot of consequence. Maybe we find ourselves with Moshe. The last thing he says is, I can't. I am heavy of mouth and tongue. So the scholars are pretty sure he's talking about having a speech impediment there, that he's not able to communicate really well. We love this about God. He always picks unlikely people. The secondborn, not the firstborn. The person who's not good at the thing is the person who God often chooses. But Moshe doesn't know that. So he says, how could you possibly pick me? He circles back on this twice. I don't have the gifts for that. So maybe you're really passionate about an issue and you feel lit up every time you talk about it, and you know there's an opportunity to maybe walk through that door and do something about it, but you say, I'm not that good of a communicator. I don't have those skills. How am I supposed to do that, engage with that? And so we don't. Maybe we find ourselves with a Moshe there. But throughout all of this, if we were like reading the KJV and we closed our eyes and imagined what is it that God is going to say in response to all those things, it'd be like, and then Moshe got struck with lightning and put on the ground, and God was like, fine, you be that way, I'll find somebody else. God does not do that. He spends a whole chapter and a half talking to Moshe about all of his insecurities. God meets us where we're at with our insecurities the whole time. He does not get frustrated until the very end of this conversation. We'll talk about why. He needs, what he desires to have from us is our yes. He's not stopped by our identity not being right, our knowledge of God not being right, not having power, not having giftedness. He's just looking for our yes. He's only stopped by our no. So what does God say to all these things? The first question was, who am I? Amazing. God always answers questions in totally unexpected ways. God's answer to Moshe's, who am I, is I am with you. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter our background. It doesn't matter if we grew up with a lot of resources, if we have our whole family behind us, we have our 401k box checked, or not. If God is with us, that's apparently to him the identifying factor of who we are. Are you walking with me? Are you alongside me? Am I alongside you? Can we be relationally close? That is apparently what's important to God. The second thing was, I don't even know you. God says, I will show you who I am. And this one and the next one, I can't make anyone listen to me. He gives him signs. And these signs are miraculous. They're supernatural. They're things like put your water on the ground and then he turns it to blood. Throw your staff on the ground, it turns into a snake. Each of those signs, by the way, have to do with God seeing Israel's suffering, seeing the Hebrew people suffering. So they were being gaslit about the death of their children that were being thrown in the Nile, right? You can't see dead bodies in a fast-moving river the same way you can see like a burn pile. And so for them it was like their children had never been born. And so God turning the Nile to blood was him saying, this is what has actually happened. This is what you have done. This is a graveyard, right? Even if the bodies were gone because of the wildlife that lived in the river, I know what the truth is, and the truth is that you've been killing people in this river. So with I don't even know who you, he says, I will show you. They won't listen to me. I can have them listen, because God has all things in his ability, including supernatural things and miraculous things that we would never even guess, right? And when we don't know that that's what those signs are about, it's just like, cool, God flex. Turn the staff into a serpent. He did that because the Egyptians were calling the Hebrew people slithery things, right? Just like we see in our modern day, one of the ways that violence is normalized against marginalized communities is by saying that they're subhuman. And so in the first chapter of Exodus, we see the Egyptian people doing that about God's people, calling them slithery things. And so God says, here's a staff, a symbol of authority in their culture, make it into a serpent, and then pull it back to say, that's not who you actually are. So God is able to do these things. If we don't feel like people listen to us, God can change that. If we don't feel like we know who God is, God can show himself to us. That is not the end of the story. The last thing that he said is, my weaknesses are too much. This is when God gets angry. So God's apparently not mad if we don't know who we are, we don't know who he is, and we doubt our power. God gets irritated if we say, I know that you're great in everything, but did you know that I'm actually really impatient, or that I'm not good at follow through, or that I experience depression or anxiety? My weakness, my issue is too big for God to deal with. That's when it says in the text that God's nose gets prickly with irritation in the Hebrew. So that's the thing that bothers him, because sometimes what we've been trained to say in this kind of Christian false humility is actually unbelief. Right? Because if I'm saying, oh, God couldn't use me, I'm just a woman, or whatever, God says, it seems like you don't believe that I can work with you and through you, right? This is about what God can do, not what we can. And yet, even after God gets irritated, he still says, okay, fine, you can have your brother. As you're walking back to Egypt, I'll send your brother out to meet you. You can have community. So the answer for weakness that we might have is working together. We don't have to do it alone. Yes, our calling is specific to us. Yes, it might be more, some of our callings might be more community oriented. Some of them might be more on our own. And yet, in our weaknesses, we both have God's strength, and also if we ask God, we might have his rest. So our takeaways for today: if God can be found, if we pursue after the glimpses that we catch sight of. Sometimes we can feel like God's way out here and I'm way down here, and I can't manufacture an encounter with God. That might be true, but sometimes we have the opportunities to chase after God, and we say, maybe next time. So next time we feel that pull, I think I want to listen to some worship music this morning, or, oh, that book about this particular issue looks interesting. Let's say yes to that and buy the book, listen to the podcast, listen to the book, whatever it is. Number 2, God has a specific call for each one of us that is so much bigger than ourselves. The work we have to do doesn't get accomplished ambiently. What I mean by that is sometimes it feels like, especially as part of the body of Christ, you know what, yes, it would be good. I feel like maybe I could be engaging in this particular way in my community. But if I don't, somebody else will. In this story, it doesn't seem that way. That's not how God engages with them. Moshe is not like, I'm tired. I've had a hard 40 years. I committed some murder. I'd like to take some time off. Find somebody else. God says, nope, it's you. It won't get done. The Exodus won't be accomplished just through vibes. Our specific call is important, and it might not happen if we don't do it, which can be hard for us when we're thinking about sovereignty. But if we don't stand in the midst of our family and exemplify our values, or stand in the middle of our workplace and fight for whatever it is that has come across your vision as, that's an opportunity to work out some more justice, it might not get done. Somebody else might not say, sure, I'll do it. Number 3, it doesn't matter who we think we are, how much we think we need to know, how powerful we feel ourselves to be, or how big our weakness is. What matters is our yes to God. Can we make it a practice when we feel called to something to say yes? Because God does not a limitation for him what we know or what we don't know, or who we are or who we aren't, or how much we're listened to. What matters to God is if we show up and we say yes when he asks us to do something. So can we focus on that? There is a Jewish teaching that I love that some of you might know. It goes that in each pocket you should have 2 pieces of paper. Well, 2 pieces, 1 in each pocket. There we go. Let's get it right. On one side, it says, I am dust, and to dust I return. And on the other pocket, it's supposed to say, the whole world was made for me. And we're supposed to carry both those things at the same time. We're in the season of Lent, and we talked about I am dust, and to dust I will return, or I presume so. I was at the funeral, so I wouldn't know, but I'm guessing that's what Pastor Emily talked about. Cool. And so that's a very Lenten. So we have a little mini practice that you can take with you into your Lent. Maybe like Moshe, we feel like I'm just dust, and to dust I'll return. I have all these weaknesses. I don't know. I don't feel qualified. I don't even know who God is. And so for that, we have these little packets of dirt. We can say, I'm made out of dirt. I'm a human. That's what Adam means. It just means dirt. We can keep dirt in one of our pockets. But then on the other side, we can say, I have a specific call, and it's unique for me and the way God made me. And I'm made out of stardust, literally. And I am loved, and I have an important purpose and calling, even though I'm dirt. So we have glitter for stardust, and we have a clear pocket. So if you'd like to, while we do another song, there's a giant well back there. So I'm just going to leave. Surprise, surprise, we are in a theater. There's wells sometimes. So I'm going to just leave this down here. We're going to do an extra song to give people, if you'd like to, time to come up and grab a glitter and a dirt. You can remember, if you like, put it in your winter coat for the rest of Lent, and just have them live there. Don't put it in the wash. Glitter explosions. Ooh, a glitter bomb. I will pray, and then we'll transition into our two songs. God, I thank you for your wisdom, that you know exactly who each of us are. You made us exactly the way we are, with our personality traits, with our passions, with the things that upset us, with our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our hobbies, all of that. You are not surprised by. They are part of your design, and you delight in us. I thank you for that. I thank you that you also care about our lives having purpose, that we have a direction that you are calling us into, and it doesn't necessarily mean selling all your stuff and going being a missionary in Africa. You have work for us to do here. You can be encountered here in Pullman, Washington, even today. So I pray for us that we would be able to encounter you, that we would be able to feel your love, but also your call to go out and do the work that you have for us to do. I pray that we would be people who say, I don't know, but you can have my yes, that you would train us in what that looks like, and that we would get to experience who you are, your beauty, your love, your compassion, through our yes that we bring today. So I pray that you would be with us. In your name, Jesus. Amen.